And here we are. We are. It's another Thursday night with Mrs. Q Live. Please let me know in the comments if you're here so I can see you in the chat. I'm hoping we'll have another very nice evening together here in Hanover Square, New York City. I have to stand right in this spot or my green screen starts to act funny. So, hi, everybody. I'm going to wait a few minutes for people to join us. Take a look and see if anybody's there. There's a few of you there. Please feel free to say hello on Facebook in the messages or on YouTube in the chat. Oh, my dog Rex is the first one tonight. Hello, my dog Rex. Yes, please hit the like button and share and subscribe so that you can always get the latest on the 18th century from Mrs. Q. You don't want to miss any news of the 18th century. Hannah Wyman 355, it's nice to see you. I must ask, Ms. Wyman, do you have the 355 in your name for the Culper Spy 355 by any chance? You can let me know. Mr. Telek is here. Good evening, Mrs. Q, to Mr. Q and the four-legged Qs. Yes, we are all here. I am upstairs in my parlor. Mr. Q is downstairs with, I think all the four-legged creatures are downstairs with Mr. Q. At least dog Q is. And one of our cats, one cat might be up here. They're wandering around freely, enjoying themselves. I hope all of you are good. Oh, Mr. Davis is here. Hello, Mr. Davis. A longtime friend, Ms. Silver. Thank you. For those of you who are in the northeastern Pennsylvania area, Saturday night in West Pittston, there will be a cemetery tour of the West Pittston Cemetery, which is at the end of Susquehanna Avenue. And I'm proud to say that I will be participating as a historical figure in that tour. And I'm not going to tell you who she was. You'll have to come on the tour to find out if you're local. And I will be wearing a totally outrageous outfit, as you can imagine. Something I can't wear here because it's a little bit too much for Mrs. Q. Yes, Miss Hannah Highwayman 355 says, yes, that's my favorite topic or group during the revolution. Well, then you might be interested to see something I want to tell you all about tonight, and that is that my very good friend Peggy Wergau's book is out. To Outwit Them All by Peggy. Deceiving the Enemy is a Dangerous Dance, all about a lady in the Culper Spy Ring and a historical fiction about who 355 might have been. This is an excellent book. I was historical consultant on this book. I read it, last winter, and I had to wait all of these months to tell you to get it because it took a while for it to come out. And it is really excellent. It is historically very accurate. And as you read this, you will feel like you are in occupied New York City. It is a wonderful story and it's family friendly. So if you want to get it for any young ladies in your family, you don't have to worry that there's anything inappropriate because there's not. Completely family friendly story. Some reviews on the back. My review is on the inside cover, and a really wonderful story about a young lady helping out the Culper Spy Ring during occupied New York City. So check it out. To Outwit Them All by my good friend Peggy Wergau. Excellent book, and I hope you all will enjoy it. Make a great Christmas gift to anyone you know who's a fan of Revolutionary War or a fan of the whole Peggy Shippen, Benedict Arnold, John Andre story, Culper Spy Ring. Be an excellent Christmas present for them. Ms. Telek says, I have the book in reserve at one of my local libraries. Excellent. I'm sure you'll enjoy it very much. It's a very easy read, and it's really intriguing. And I'll tell you that when I read this book myself last winter, it actually renewed my own interest in occupied New York City. It was a subject I really hadn't worked on in a while, but her book really got me more interested in occupied New York City again. So if it did it for me, someone who spends all my time in the time period, I think you'll all really love it and enjoy it as well. So all you Culper-Spiring fans, check it out. So tonight, I thought we would talk about an 18th century plague, political factionalism. Something we can do without in the 18th century here in New York. Now, as you may know, we have two political factions at the time of the American Revolution, Whigs and Tories. Oh, Miss Frederick is here. Hello, Miss Frederick. Yes, my bonnet is very nice, but it's so transparent. You can see the green from my green screen behind it. Thank you. And I'm hoping to see you on Saturday, Miss Frederick, and at other events as well. So Whigs and Tories. What are Whigs and Tories? Well, depending on where you are, they're different things. So we have Whigs and Tories in England, and we have Whigs and Tories in America. And my question for you tonight to consider as we talk is, why should we have them at all? Do they serve a useful purpose to the people? So in England, they are the two major opposing political factions. And I thought you might be interested in hearing that their names originated around 1697, at the time that there was debate over the succession to the crown of James, the Duke of York, who you might know was credited with conquering the colony of New Amsterdam and creating the colony of New York. So that is James. At the time he did that, he was Charles II's brother, the Duke of York. And a time came when there was consideration of his succession to the crown. The only problem is that James was Catholic, and there was a great deal of opposition to a Catholic king. So the two names, Whigs and Tory, grow out of that argument over the succession of James II, who will become James II. He will become king. They both come from the Scotch-Irish, or a dialect of Scottish Gaelic, and Whigs were horse thieves. And later they're known as Scottish Presbyterians. Here in colonial New York, the Scottish Presbyterians are Whigs primarily. They were known for standing for nonconformity and rebellion. Of course, they're rebelling against the succession to the crown, and they're against the succession of a Catholic king. Tories were known as papist outlaws, supporters of James II and Catholicism. So they were papists. Both were pejorative terms at the time, meant as insults, and both criminal gangs, I suppose, which I think is an appropriate term for them. Miss Frederick says she's looking forward to the cemetery tour, as am I. Have some great surprises coming up on that tour. So those of you who are in the Pittston area, that's the West Pittston Cemetery, this Saturday from 5 to 8 p.m. Suggested donation is only $5, and it's going to be a really wonderful experience. PhD Nick Rivers says, hi, everybody. Hello, Mr. Rivers. It's nice for you to join us. So those are the origins of the names Whig and Tory. Both factions, in my time, the 1770s, have come to support a constitutional monarchy, which came about during what's called the Glorious Revolution of 1689, which is when James II was replaced on the crown with William and Mary. William of Orange, the Dutch king, and Mary, who was next in succession for the monarchy. They ascended the crown with the agreement that they would accept constitutional limitations on monarchical power in England. This also at this time provided a Bill of Rights for the people. So this is the Glorious Revolution of 1689. And both parties after 1689 do support, to one degree or another, the constitutional monarchy, which, as I mentioned, limits the monarchy of England in a way that the other monarchies of Europe are not limited. So when we look at my time, the 18th century, we see the King of England does not have the same authoritative powers over his subjects as you find in France or Austria or Spain or the other countries of Europe. So how are they different if they both support limited monarchical powers and they both support authority in the parliament, specifically the House of Commons, representing the subjects of the crown? They also believe, some of them, in religious tolerance for Protestants, right? So we have the Church of England or Anglicans and religious tolerances. Now, Whigs support religious tolerance for Protestants. They also support more individual rights through the Bill of Rights that came out of the Glorious Revolution. So they believe they support more individual rights of the people. They also support more limitation on the monarchy through the power of the commons. They also believe in free trade, even for the American colonies. And they also are for restrained foreign policy and no wars of empire. So those are our Whigs in England. Let's see, Mr. Rivera says, this is why I cheer for the Netherlands when they compete against Spain in football. Very good, sir. So the Tories in England support the monarchy, the constitutional monarchy still. I mean, they don't want to overthrow the Constitution and return to a total monarchy. They support constitutional monarchy. And they do support the supremacy of the Church of England or the Anglican Church and tend to be less tolerant of other religions. They support the traditional institutions and hierarchy of the old aristocracy in England. They support protectionist economic policies of England, particularly when dealing with the colonies. And some of those, you might know, protectionist policies eventually led us to rebel against England. They believe in a strong British Empire abroad, so they do support the wars, the East India Company's adventures in India and China. They tend to be conservative. They support English traditions, the old social hierarchy, the landed gentry, and the old aristocracy. So you can kind of see the difference here. While we have the Whigs supporting more limited government, more religious freedom, and they tend to be supported by the growing new middle class in England, which is an urban class. They believe in free trade, even in the colonies, as I mentioned, and they believe that minimal government leads to innovation and prosperity. So you get an idea of how the two parties view how England ought to behave. I should say, both parties, in their view of the colonies, may have different views of what parliamentary authority is over us, but they both do believe that the colonies exist to suit their needs and their prosperity. So a little bit different, right? So they both still believe that we are here for their advantage, not for our own. So it's an important point to remember, except for some of the most very radical Whigs who we find during this time, like John Wilkes, Isaac Barre, and even William Pitt to a degree, Pitt the Elder, and Adam Smith to a degree, and some of the others. Both parties, as I mentioned, view the colonies as something to administer for their benefit, not our benefit, for their benefit. So those are the two parties as they exist in England. Now, here in the American colonies, we also have our Whigs and Tories. Oh, Mr. White is here. He says, I'll have to watch later. He's doing a private tour in Easton for Lafayette College. Have an excellent tour, Mr. White, and I will see you next time. So how do we get Whigs and Tories here in the American colonies? And do we even need these inherited factions from England? So they still use the term Whigs and Tories here, Whigs and Tories, but they're a little different here in what they stand for. In my opinion, we don't need them. We shouldn't have them. And all they do is lead to mischief and discontent among the people. So here in America, the Tories, of course, support Parliament's authority over the colonies. They also support the supremacy of the Church of England and the old aristocratic hierarchy, which they would like to see maintained here in America. So the families here in America who are Tories tend to be Anglican. They also tend to be landed gentry here as well, with much of their land given to them by the crown or the royal governors. And they tend to support Toryism, or the authority of the Parliament in the colonies. Whigs here, on the other hand, support more colonial autonomy through our own elected colonial legislatures. They also support more types of religious freedom, and depending on the colony in which you live, that could be great religious freedom, as you see in New York and Pennsylvania, with many, many different religious denominations represented. Or it could be less tolerant, for instance, when you get to Massachusetts, but each of the colonies determines their own religious tolerance and the level of that. The Whigs here also support innovation in manufactures, in farming, and in other ways of making things, and increasingly will support rebellion against England. So my question as we go through how these two parties behave or factions behave is, do they achieve anything beyond setting the people against each other? So what we have going into all of our, let's say, differences with the crown is we may start out talking about the Stamp Act of 1765. And during the Stamp Act, interesting, both political factions were opposed to England, both Whigs and Tories. And the reason for that is that both of them were going to suffer financially from the Stamp Act. So the Stamp Act affected everyone, regardless of economic position, regardless of whether you were a landowner, you were an artisan, you were a dock worker, whatever you did, farmer, the Stamp Act was going to affect you. And for one of those times, we see both Whigs and Tories united against the Stamp Act, and perhaps not fully united in the rationale we used to oppose the Stamp Act. In opposing the Stamp Act, we have a pamphlet, The Rights of the Colonists, written by a Whig in Rhode Island, Mr. Stephen Hopkins, who also served as Chief Justice of the Court in Rhode Island and also as a governor of Rhode Island. And in that wonderful pamphlet, he lays out our rights as British subjects as they ought to be respected by the Crown. And he tells us that in exchange for coming to this continent and taking such huge risks to settle the continent for what will be the benefit of England, we were gifted rights as British subjects, full rights and privileges as British subjects, as a gift for coming here and benefiting England through our extensive hardship. My dog Rex says, my, how nothing concerning government employees has changed. Well, Rex, may I tell you, in my time, we have many corrupt government employees. Government employees, for instance, we have, speaking of free trade, we have many rules governing imports into our colonies and exports out of our colonies. We are forbidden to manufacture anything that competes with British manufacturers, and we are forbidden from importing anything that competes with British manufacturers from other countries without paying high customs on them. However, it's well known, and of course, I as a merchant lady know this, is well known that the custom agents can be paid off to look the other way when those boxes of items may come in through the port that should not be allowed, or when different types of things are being shipped elsewhere that shouldn't be allowed. Oh, maybe a little bit of payment, and they'll again turn their heads. We have many corrupt officials here. Let's not even discuss the Office of Indian Affairs and the corruption that occurs there. So we have many corrupt government officials. And by the way, the Stamp Act would have created a massive government bureaucracy with even more government officials, who I'm sure could also be easily paid off to look the other way, as they often do. So what we have here in the Stamp Act is our refusal to pay it based on those rights as British subjects as outlined in Mr. Hopkins' pamphlet. And one of those is that we cannot be taxed by anyone for whom we don't vote. So only bodies we elect here can tax us. So that would be our local colonial legislatures, who have the right to tax us. Britain has no right to tax us internally this way, to tax us on something we use. They do have the right to place customs on things traveling through the ports, but not to place an internal tax on our use of any item or consumption of any item. So that was our opposition to the Stamp Act. So that gets a little touchy for our Tory friends who do believe in total parliamentary authority over the colonies. But at the same time, many of them were going to suffer due to the Stamp Act. Some of them lawyers, some of them landed gentry, some of them merchants, who all were going to pay this extra tax. So for a short time, we found our Whigs and Tories united against the Stamp Act, but not so united when it came to the Quartering Act and paying off England's war here against France that we call the French and Indian War. We should really call it the England and France War, because it was really England and France at war with each other, using men of the colonies and allied Indian nations to fight each other. So perhaps we should reconsider and call it the England and France War rather than the French and Indian War. England calls it the 7 Years' War. They avoid that unpleasantness entirely of setting the native tribes against each other for their benefits. They completely avoid that little difficulty by calling it the 7 Years' War and having no connotation whatsoever to the native people who fought in it. When it came time to pay for that war, because of course, as Adam Smith warned us, the elite of England love to fight their wars. Well, they don't fight their wars, but they love to have their wars to feel powerful and to feel that the British Empire is great, but they know they can't pay for those wars. So instead, they find ways to tax future generations. And in this case, they looked for a way to tax us. So if you have ever seen some of those magnificent estates outside of London, the people who live in those magnificent estates decided that we, who live simply like this, ought to pay for their adventures in war abroad. And you can understand perhaps why we became angry. Who else is here? PhD Nick Rivera says, wait, we were cool with quartering the Brits. No, we were not cool with that, as you might say. Mr. Facemeyer says, sorry for being late. Hello, Mrs. Q from Manassas. Hello, Mr. Facemeyer. So the Tories say, yes, we should pay for these wars because these wars enhance the British Empire. And if the British Empire is enhanced, the colonies are enhanced as well, because they protect us and they nurture us and they keep us, of course, safe, and they buy our raw materials and they provide the goods we need at high inflated prices, of course, higher than we can pay if we had a free market abroad. And of course, they do buy our raw materials at a lower price than we could sell them to other countries abroad, right? So they have us locked into this relationship. But the Tories say we benefit from all this, and therefore we should pay for the troops to be here for our protection, and we should be happy to help pay for the war debts of Britain. So we begin to see the Whigs and the Tories start to diverge over the Quartering Act, where the Whigs here in America say, no, we don't need your soldiers here. It was your war, and any problems that remain from that war are remaining because of the agitation that you are causing between the people here and the native tribes. We won't pay for your war, and we don't want to pay for your soldiers because we suspect that the soldiers may be here not for our protection, but for our oppression. You see, we knew that after the Stamp Act, because we won the argument over the Stamp Act, didn't we? We united, we refused to sell or buy from England, and brought them to their knees. And they surrendered and repealed the Stamp Act. After that happened, they weren't so dumb. Oh, here comes Doggy Q. You can hear he just opened the door. I can't even open the door to keep him out. He's here. He must have just had his food. Let me pick up the screen for him to go through. So after the Stamp Act, after we won, they weren't, let me say, the brightest characters in the parliament, but they were smart enough to know that they needed to keep us from doing that again. And they needed to try to watch out and not cause the type of protesting and unified protesting that existed in 1765. And so the soldiers came. And so there's what some of us think was the true reason for the soldiers and the Quartering Act, to prevent us from protesting in the same manner in which we did over the Stamp Act. And so we said no. Or the people who identified as Whigs said no, and the people who identified as Tories said yes, we should pay for this because it makes Britain great, and whatever makes Britain great makes us great in turn. And the next division between the Whigs and the Tories, of course, there are many other issues upon which they're divided, but we'll go over the big ones tonight. The Tea Act. Now, what was the Tea Act? I think in your time, you referred to the Tea Act, something like the Tea Act, as too big to fail. It's too big to fail. And that is what England argued. The East India Company, which was on the brink of financial failure, which would cause massive financial problems in London, was too big to fail. And so the Parliament, many of whose members' campaigns had been paid for by the East India Company, or who owned stock in the East India Company, or who owned stock in other companies who were dependent on the East India Company, or who were part of the Bank of England, who needed their loans paid back by the East India Company, all voted to help the East India Company by allowing their tea to be sold in America with no taxes, no customs leaving England, and no customs arriving in America. The idea being that that would make that tea so much cheaper than competing tea that we would all buy it, and it would help the East India Company. Oh, we have some comments. Let's see, someone has to explain to me the custom of English tea time. Well, maybe someone English here can explain that. The custom of English tea time. Of course, we don't have that here in the American colonies because, unlike our friends the English, we have to work. But we do take a break midday. I do close my shop for a time in the afternoon so that I can go home, have something to eat, and rest, and then open again. Here in New York, we stay open late in the evening, and we also dine our last meal a bit later than those in the other colonies. So we are a much later schedule here in New York. We don't call it tea time, but more like an afternoon break where we close everything for a couple of hours in the afternoon to eat and to socialize a bit, and then we go back to work and keep much later hours here. This may be a uniquely New York custom. I am not sure. And so we said, why should we help the East India Company? They're a morally bankrupt country in what they have done in India. And they have designed their own financial ruin. And we here in America are all self-made at whatever we have. Why should I, who inherited my father's business and have made it even more profitable over time, why should I, if I have a neighbor who has a failed business, who has hired all of their relatives who are lazy and don't work, and whose shop is a mess and has no customers, if they have taken loans, why should I have to help them pay back their loans if they cannot? Shouldn't they have to go out of business and spend their time in the poorhouse until they pay back their loans like everyone else? Why should I have to use my money to rescue them? And this was the same logic we used toward the East India Company. If you are a Whig, that is. If you are a Tory, you said, the East India Company cannot fail because if it does, the British Empire will fail. Why? It's because of the East India Company that the British Empire is so great. And if the British Empire fails, what will happen to us in the colonies? Who will take care of us? Who will defend us? If the British Empire fails, we will fail as well. In other words, as you might say, they're too big to fail. Well, the argument between Whigs and Tories over the Tea Act, as you know, reached fever pitch until the men of Boston became so angry they threw the tea into the harbor. And you all know what happened next, right? The British occupied Boston. They removed their charter. They removed their civilian government. And that eventually led to the American Revolutionary War, where Tories still supported parliamentary authority. So when the people of Massachusetts were suffering, when the people of Boston were suffering over having their port closed, having their civilian government dissolved and a military government put in its place, having no more civilian courts, but having their people transported to England for trial, while they were suffering under these abuses, all against our rights as British subjects, why the Tories still supported parliamentary authority to do those things. So that is the difference between a Whig and a Tory. The Whigs said, after Lexington and Concord, of course, well, really even starting before that, that it was time for us to separate ourselves from England. This idea goes back very far in New York, with one of the most, let me say, the most well-known speeches coming at around 1769 on the part of merchant and ship captain Mr. Alexander McDougall, who, in addressing the group of merchants here in New York, I forgot what the organization is called, and I belong to it. The Chamber of Commerce, that is. Yes, our Chamber of Commerce in New York has been around since the mid-1700s. While addressing the Chamber of Commerce, commented that we would be just as well without England. He says, look around. All you have here, you've built themselves. All England wants is to make us slaves, to benefit from our hard work and determination. They care nothing for us. They know nothing about us. They understand nothing about us. All we are to them is income that benefits them. We would be far better off without them. Left to our own, we would not have their enemies, as we would not fly their flag. We would no longer be involved in their wars, and we could trade freely with everyone else. So this idea, dating prior to Captain McDougall's speech, but his speech being probably the most well-known enunciation of it. So already in New York, there was consideration that we might be better off without England. And of course, that voice became very loud once the Crown oppressed Boston the way it did. And then once they invaded Boston, and Lexington and Concord occurred, and we were at war. But do you know, even when we were at war, I know this sounds outrageous, but even though we were at war, and in 1776, even with the massing of the British Navy here and 40,000 soldiers, much more than needed to take New York, obviously intended to move throughout the colonies, even with that massing here in New York in 1776, the Tories still supported the Crown's right to do so, the Crown's right to kill us. As the Tories said, we were in a state of rebellion, and this was the king's right. Thomas Paine had some interesting things to say about Tories, right? He said he'd rather be with, one Whig than 1,000 Tories, because one Whig was so much more courageous than 1,000 Tories. The Tories were loud, but they were cowardly, and they were mean-natured. So Thomas Paine had some things to say about Tories. So we have Whigs and Tories, Whigs and Tories. Well, what happens if you're somewhere in the middle? If you think the Tories have some good ideas and you think the Whigs have some good ideas, can you say that? Well, you cannot, because you'll be a traitor to one side or another. So my theory is that Whigs and Tories may not be so good for us. And hopefully, after our war with England, there will be no more Whigs and Tories. Although my fear is that new factions might take their place. So I hope you enjoyed this. Someone says the East India Company, Citibank. Tea and opium were the drugs of the times. From My Dog Rex. Tea and opium and sugar. Don't forget the sugar trade. The sugar trade, key to a vast amount of money making in the American colonies in the Caribbean, the sugar trade. Also key to Rhode Island's wealth, rum, and the making of rum. And all of these things, of course, are going to become issues with England over time. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope in your time you don't have Whigs and Tories anymore. Although I suspect you may have something worse, but always remember that the government is never your friend. And whoever the leaders are in the government are the least of your friends. They do not care for you. Political factions do not care for you. They always operate only for their own prosperity and their own continuation and their own accumulation of power. Always remember, we know that very well in my time. The Whigs and Tories of England, both struggling for power with each other, but not to represent us or do what's best for us, or even do what's best for the people of England, but to do what's best for their own interests. So our view is the government is bad for us. The government is our enemy. And whoever is the most powerful in the government is the biggest enemy. So keep that in mind. So I hope you guys all had a wonderful evening. I hope to see some of you on Saturday in West Pittston Cemetery. And if not, I will be with the rest of you Sunday night, 9 p.m. Eastern Time on Republic Broadcasting Network, RBN, republicbroadcasting.org, to talk a little bit more about the 18th century. And many of you got in touch with me last week and told me how much you enjoyed my programming last week, where I talked about aristocracy in my time here, and that you have an aristocracy in your time, that you have allowed an aristocracy to grow in the nation that we fought so hard to establish away from aristocracy. Shame on you. And I may be speaking a little bit more about that this Sunday. Mr. Tulloch says, amen, Mrs. Q. Thank you. PhD Nick Rivera says, I like that. And Mr. Linden says, when we say that, we are told you want to live in Somalia. Oh, Mr. Linden, I have been insulted by some of the finest, wealthiest, most intelligent people of my time, and I am still here. It bothers me not at all. As long as I have the love of Mr. Q and his support and the support of my close friends and fellow thinkers, I don't care, and neither should you. Mr. Rivera says, I'm sorry. Someone says, hi, Mrs. Q. You were a little bit late as we are saying goodbye, but please don't worry about people calling you names. Don't worry about people insulting you. As I said, some of the finest, most educated, wealthiest people of my time and your time have called me names and insulted me. And it only makes me more confident that I am saying the right thing. And if you can have Whigs and Tories angry at you, as our friends, the Wicked Triumvirate did, right? When they wrote the Independent Reflector, they acquired the wrath of Whigs and Tories. If you can have them both angry at you, you are probably telling a lot of the truth. And don't let them stop you. And please know you have friends everywhere in my time and in yours. So I hope to, I won't be able to see you or interact with you, but I hope you'll be joining me on Sunday night again, maybe continuing our talk about the way modern America has allowed the aristocracy we fought so hard to relieve ourselves of to grow again, and that you must remove it if you want the liberty and freedom that we created this country to have. Mr. Rivera says, this was entertaining. I caught my first live show. Fantastic. Well, thank you. And I hope you will join me again next Thursday for a bit of 18th century Halloween, I believe. So thank you all very much. Have a wonderful evening, and hope to join you on the radio on Sunday or back here next Thursday. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you so much for supporting me. Please like my video, subscribe to my channel, and recommend it to all of your friends who want to get a different look at early American life. Mr. Davis sends me a heart, my heart to you as well, Mr. Davis.